Sharing, we've been talking about how bad this is. Well, we can learn some lessons here, and then we can have some decent takeaways that help us deal with this, right? So let's talk about those things. All right, first off, this is just the beginning. The problem is that, as Alex mentioned, anytime you do an update, we've got to make sure that that update didn't reinstall the vulnerable Log4j library, right? Because it's necessary in a lot of things. And so the tendency is to leave it, patch it, put the new one in there, and then later on you update something else that puts it back because it depends upon it, needs it to run. And so we have to make sure that we then look at it again to make sure that we haven't broken ourselves or created the vulnerability again after patching it, right? So we see a lot of that. That's really what the FTC is saying here. Beware, it's going to take us a while.
Yeah, the other thing about it being just the beginning, it goes back to what I said before, which is that the logger is going to be used in ways that folks don't know, because it's just such an ubiquitous thing. Developers are using loggers all the time for all sorts of things. So you may perform, scans, you may think that you're okay, and then you realize, oh, not only did I miss the library, but there's a new function in this web app that allows the attacker to actually access the logger directly that we didn't know about before.
And maybe it wasn't there before.
And maybe it wasn't there before. So this will be, a painful few months for a while. We got to stay alert to what security companies are saying, to what vendors are saying about their products. We do have, in our cyber alert, we sent out a list of vendor responses to this. It's a massive list by CISA that actually keeps track of where vendors are and where their products are. I highly encourage you to look at that list, compare it with your list of vendors, because it's a good way to find out, hey, I have this version of, Symantec, for example. I have this version of Symantec's endpoint. And I happen to know that they actually came out and said that they were vulnerable unless you patch to X version. So, that's going to be a useful resource for you.
Absolutely critical. Also to note here that there are patches for older versions of Java, and those have to be applied too, right? So you don't have to automatically upgrade to Java 8. If you have Java 6, you can still patch it. So there are some good patches out there for that as well. This is, in fact, the important list from CISA. Identify all internet-facing assets, so you know what you should be looking at first. That doesn't mean don't check everything else, but start with those. And make sure that you know which ones are using the Log4j library so that you can do something about it. Assess your systems and isolate any device that could not be affected. So that could be affected. So what we're saying here is recognize that if that device can't be patched, it must be contained. And by contained, we mean isolated from an external source, so nobody can get to it. But also recognize the fact that if other internal sources allow them to gain access to that particular device and it's vulnerable, they could then utilize it to attack you.
Yeah.
Now, that means they have to hack in first, but are you really that aware of where other access they have from the outside in?
Well, again, especially if it's a critical system, can you afford that risk?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would actually suggest and have suggested to some of our clients and customers and friends and family and other people around the world who've asked me, what do we do about this particular event? And they were talking about cameras with remote access. Well, they were just going to turn off all their cameras. Unfortunately, that leaves them open to physical security issues because their cameras are off. So we talked about them isolating it onto a separate segment. So they isolated all the cameras onto a segment, and then they allowed people to VPN in using multi-factor authentication to get there. And the point is layering the security on as much as possible, and then recognizing that they put it on a separate network so that if the inevitable happens, and not if but when, they eventually gain access to that network, they're not able to then attack any of the other attached networks because it's segmented off, right?
Yeah, that one system that's compromised.
Right. So really think about it that way. So if you have to use that device, and so this gave them use of their cameras in a much more secure way, that also meant that if they were then compromised, they wouldn't lose anything else. That's critical. Those are the best ways to do it. Layer your security around those, isolation and containment. And then once you've isolated those, check with your vendors and say, when are you going to patch this? Where's the patch? And that might tell you how good that vendor is and how well they're thinking about cybersecurity. As mentioned, the customer that I was talking to about the cameras said, well, we're never going to use those cameras again. Get it. I completely understand. The point is, going forward, when you talk to those vendors, include cybersecurity. Where were you with this patch? How quickly did you guys respond? Those are questions to ask in the future so that we do have a lesson learned right here.
Yeah, and it should be noted too that this is affecting everyone. I mean, even folks who are really staying on top of it, they couldn't have seen this coming. This was a 0 day that happened in December. So it's really all about how they responded after the 0 day. How quickly did they make sure, as a vendor, did they make sure that were they transparent? Did they have a plan to fix your systems? You know, if they had systems in your network. Really, that's how you should grade these guys, because everybody's going to be vulnerable to this. It's really about how we respond.
Right, because it's built into so many things. And then monitoring, right? How do you know whether or not you're being scanned? Well, we were able to definitively tell people, you're being scanned, let's block that, and here's the device they found, let's patch that. Right, knowing that and trying to stay ahead of the bad guys proactively is really important. Always something we talk about as a monitoring company. We're really good at this. There are other good ones out there too, but do monitoring, whether it's us or somebody else. Please include that as part of your natural framework. You've got to put it in there. We've got to be watching the watchers, and some of the other webinars we've done are specific to that. All right, and then we have to determine your risk for potential exposure, right? It's a needle in a haystack. Let's find it. There are good ways of finding those needles, right? You ever watch Mythbusters? They did a great one just on that. The point is really understanding that there are Java processes used in your system and whether or not they're using the Log4j libraries, and can they be accessed directly from the internet, right? So that's number one. Those are the ones you want to look at first. Do the vulnerable Java processes access critical databases? Once again, are they off on a separate segment in a DMZ as they properly should be? And does that mean that they then don't have access to your critical evidence or other data or engineering concepts or things you don't want people to be able to take away from you, right? Or gain access to? Because that means they won't be able to blackmail you because they can't get into them. So really understanding and doing those segmented layers of defense architecturally, really important. And then which of our applications are then running it, right? Because it may not just be in those servers, it may be in every endpoint.
Yeah, and it should be noted, this is a prioritized list. You know,
number one.
Make sure internet and critical,
absolutely
really kind of tied for first, in my opinion. And then number 3 is, okay, what other applications? What other applications are running this? And that's going to be a hard question to answer, frankly, because it's going to be.
And so let's go back to the Maryland question earlier, right? They're running an older 911 system. There's some older versions of Java there that they probably can't patch, right? And upgrading means that there might be downtime. So it's a big concern, and that vendor may not be ready to do it as quickly as they need it to be done. So it really falls into this list, right? Number 1. Does it have access to the internet? Well, the answer should be yes, right? It should have some limited access to the internet, but can we make sure that the vulnerable systems that are running the vulnerable code don't have access to the internet? That's an absolute number 1.
Yeah, that's a question that we have to try.
So that's the question to ask. Is there a way we can isolate these and make sure that they are properly contained? The reason I'm saying they should be connected to the internet is because of management and other capabilities, or they have to receive the call, right? So there are different ways that we have to protect those, but layering that protection on and making sure it's more of a whitelisted protection. In other words, only allow the things that should be in. Everything else gets blocked, including Java, access out, right? So that we can make sure that they aren't going to gain automatic access to those devices. And then really look at how they're interconnected to our critical other data, right? Are they tied into our log recorder? Are they tied into the evidentiary things? And can we protect that, make sure it's one way so that somebody can't then use it to gain access to that data as well? And it doesn't matter if you're a 911 center or anything else, you have to look at what's most important to you data-wise and protect it the most. It sounds as simple as that, but it's really complex sometimes when we look at how things interoperate.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that, you know, just because you're running an older version of Java doesn't necessarily mean there isn't a patch for it. And in fact, there is. Kind of going back to slide 37, which we won't do now, but there are listed for each of the older Javas, Java 8, 7, and 6, there are different versions of Log4j that have this fixed. Oracle actually went back and patched these for older versions of Java because of how ubiquitous the problem was.
And Log4j isn't automatically running in all of those things. It will be there as a library, but it may not actually be susceptible to the Log4j because the logging aspect may not be used, right? So it also has to be turned on. So if it isn't turned on and we can deal without it, we can turn it off, right?
Yeah.
Or make sure that it remains turned on.
Yeah, and I would advocate for removing it if you're not using it. But,
yeah, absolutely. But that's a security thing. All right, let's do another poll. Which version of Log4j should systems currently be updated? And this means you are paying a lot of attention if you get this one right. So we will give everybody a moment to take a guess, or if you remember, that would be kudos to you. Let's see if we can get some folks to vote and see which one they think is the most likely here. Hopefully you wrote it down, to be honest. But remember, we're going to send you this a recording of this webinar too, so you can read through all the slides that we didn't read through because we would never have time. The point is to cover a lot of material to get you forearmed with this awareness. That's the whole point of our conversation here today.
Yes, and please follow up with us after the webinar if you have further questions or want assistance.
Absolutely, and advice is free. We're here to help, first and foremost. We'll give you the secret password, which is help. So we're here to help. Just come in and ask us. We'd love to help you. Or just answer questions. Or if you have a good idea, we need to get it out to folks. We can help with that as well. All right, so let's go ahead and close the poll. Which version of Log4j systems currently be updated to? So this is the most current patch. And the answer is, and 76% of you got it right, 2.17-1. Good job. You guys pay attention, or you wrote it down, which is great. All of the above. So